Oppo, a phone company from which I've yet to actually get hands-on with any of its products, has announced the R1 with a 5-inch IPS display and 720p resolution. Inside is a rare MediaTek 1.3 GHz quad-core processor and 1 GB of RAM plus 16 GB of internal memory. Following Nokia's lead on the Lumia 720, Oppo's R1 is an 8-megapixel cam with wide f/2.0 aperture, helping with static subjects in low light. It's all Android 4.2 only though, plus Oppo's UI additions. A 2400 mAh battery is decent in a 7mm thick device. Maybe I should get an Oppo in for review sometime soon. I cannot imagine how tough it must be, how it must feel to be entering the smartphone world 6 years after Apple and 5 years after Google. A year on its own is a lot in smartphones. 5 years is an eternity. Now, Symbian and Windows Mobile have been going for about 5 years when Apple and Google came along, but in that case, there was something new in terms of vision and implementation introduced, a full-screen capacitive touch and an ambition to be a pocket computer more than a converged phone. And now we have Jolla picking up the reins of MIMO and MeeGo from 2010-era Nokia, introducing the world to Sailfish OS, a multitasking OS, an interface based on, you guessed it, a full-face capacitive touchscreen with no, as far as I can tell, unique selling points in hardware. Talk about brave. Now, Jolla has hedged its bet slightly by including an Android 4 runtime and App Store, here's Instagram, for example, working fine, the Russian Yandex store that works rather well in terms of bulking up the software offering here, but with nothing outstanding in terms of hardware. This is no boutique device, and assuming you have no significant objections to one of the various skins on genuine Android devices, why then wouldn't you just buy an established Android device in the first place? Android is now very mature, everything works, there's bucket loads of choice in hardware, and so on. And that, unfortunately, will be the crux of the matter for Jolla. Never mind an uphill battle ahead of it. It's facing a near vertical climb. Aside from geeks like me, and maybe you, interested in new mobile OS and interfaces for their own sake, Jolla will need some heavyweight carrier partners around the world to make any headway. The hardware here is indeed unremarkable, with fairly solid construction despite a fully removable back at the half, as Jolla calls it. A 4.5-inch QHD LCD display is bright enough, but suffers a little compared to most other 2013 720p efforts at this price point, around €400 or pounds. The ridge between the two halves is a little odd, but it does offer terrific grip when holding the Jolla phone in the hand. There's a decent mono speaker under one of the two cosmetic grills in the phone's bottom. Here's a demo at full volume. Bit of Pink Floyd. It's not that loud though. I am wondering if this can be tweaked in software in the same way as it was recently on the Nexus 5. Under, in this case, a white rear cover is a replaceable 2100 mAh battery that just got me through a day of moderate use, a micro SIM and micro SD bays, and no less than 6 special gold contacts. I presume these will be used in the future, perhaps adding an other half that has a hinged QWERTY keyboard, a second battery, or something else clever. I'd love to know what Jolla has planned here. The supplied cover has a chip in to identify itself, and this seems to be picked up wirelessly, not using any of the aforementioned pins. These cosmetic covers then trigger something in the OS which offers to change the ambience, i.e. the theme being used, to match. All nice ideas, and I wish Jolla well with this other half concept. I've always loved the idea of my smartphone being modular. Inside is a 1.4 GHz dual-core processor and 1 GB of RAM, seemingly enough to keep Sailfish jogging along nicely. There's 16 GB of mass memory, quite generous considering the card slot too, so not cutting-edge specs, but enough if the OS itself is speedy. And on the whole it is. Sailfish never seem laggy. Applications take a second or two to open, but then they can be switched to instantaneously thereafter using the multitasking. Ah yes, multitasking. Unlike on iOS and Windows Phone, applications in Sailfish stay running unless you close them, although your interface to what's running is always capped at 9 covers here, i.e. thumbnailed mini screens for each app presented in a grid, very similar to how things worked on MeeGo on the Nokia N9, and also under the current BlackBerry OS X, by the way. Tap on any of the 9 covers though, and bang, you're in. One slight, though understandable, annoyance is that the very nature of the last app used goes top left and work across from their system means that switching between half a dozen apps always means playing a game of, now where's the thumbnail for that app gone, every few seconds as they shuffle around. Another annoyance, also understandable, is that because the covers helpfully show the contents of each application's screen or state, they change according to what you are doing in each. So your eye can't just quickly scan for an icon you recognise, e.g. gallery, and there's no textual labelling at all. Happily, other UI innovations work more successfully. Rather than have a menu button or on-screen menu shortcut, here you swipe down in an application to see context-sensitive menu options, and the even cleverer bit is that you can simply release your thumb when the option you want is highlighted. No need for an extra tap. Swipe up from the bottom at any point to see notifications. Swipe from the right to minimise an application. Swipe up from the dock on the multitasking view to get to the main app listing. And within an application with multiple views, to go back, you just swipe from the left, which is very intuitive indeed. Everything hangs together, though for applications which mix portrait and landscape mode, it can get quite confusing, knowing which way to swipe at which point in the UI. Is this all better than Android or Windows Phone? It's certainly conceptually more elegant, though my gut feel is that it would, well, confuse more people than it helps in the long run. Sorry, Jolla, it's an incredibly valiant effort, but there's an element here of solving problems that don't necessarily need to be solved. Jolla native apps are quite scarce. In addition to the usual staples, most of which get installed from the Jolla store on your first boot up, you do get third-party clients for Dropbox, Evernote, and some other popular services, but nothing for Facebook or Twitter or podcasting or YouTube and so on. Android support has to be installed manually, but once that's in place and the phone rebooted, you can then install the native Yandex Store app and you're then into a third-party Android app store experience, with many, though not all, the applications you might expect, most of which run flawlessly. Nothing from Google directly, of course, ruling out Gmail, Drive, YouTube, Google+, etc. One big limitation of the Android system here is that the virtual machine used only gets one cover slot in the selfish multitasking system. So you end up multitasking using the Android task switcher, which you'll be familiar with, within the virtual machine that is itself within the selfish multitasking interface. Oh heck, you know what I mean. Some online services, for example Facebook, end up reverting to the mobile website as viewed in the Jolla web browser, which doesn't do landscape and doesn't text flow properly, making browsing often a frustrating experience. A text entry is pleasant enough with a very iOS 7-like keyboard, though without iOS 7's intelligence. Jolla provides spell checking corrections, but there's no way to turn on auto-correction of words yet. Media handling is pretty good with flawless playback of my test samples. Music sounded particularly clear and full via headphones. None were in my review box, so I was using my own high-quality monsters, but still very clear indeed, very good audio circuitry. The 8-megapixel camera is par for the course and up with most Android devices. Great in daylight and for macros, but dodgy results in low light. See these samples from Richard Yates and myself. .1080p video is distinctly average on this first-gen hardware. And what you're hearing now is an overdub because the Jolla's MP4 files wouldn't work with iMovie. The file format in the MPEG is all over the place. Also, actually, on the phone, the audio is rather glitchy at the start and end of clips. And as you can see here, the video is anything but smooth. Ah well, room for improvement, Jolla. There's just so much for Jolla's programs to do still. It's at this point in a phone review that I normally point out some of the gotchas and issues I found. The list would be quite long with Jolla, and it would be unfair of me to go through them as the company clearly knows that it's very early days for the Sailfish OS. Having just spent the last 2 years proclaiming that Windows Phone wasn't finished yet and urging people to have patience, I feel like I'm back in 2010 with this. Jolla is now, in terms of apps and functionality and glitches and omissions, roughly where Windows Phone was then, which is a sobering realisation. Now, hopefully, Jolla is more nimble than the Microsoft juggernaut, and it won't take another 3 years for this OS and ecosystem to be fully usable and or successful. Say it takes a third of that, a year. We're still not going to be seeing Jolla in fully baked, commercially competitive smartphone form until the end of 2014. I enjoyed my time with Jolla's first creation, even if I could only really recommend buying one to a geek, and a patient geek at that. Give it a year, better specs, more mature software, and some innovative other halves though, and things might be very different. You'll have gathered that in addition to virtual pints of beer from you guys, ProPorter is also now helping keep the lights on at phone show towers, to which extent I'm running through some of my absolute favourite products of theirs. The idea was to feature a large range of cases for iPhones and Galaxies and Nexi and the usual suspects. Don't worry, all of these are going in the virtual pint of beer a month club prize pool. However, you've all got phone shops with equally huge choice and case designs in your local town, no doubt, even if they're not necessarily up to the same quality. But what caught my eye was ProPorter's Customiser system, whereby you can upload your own photo and a shell case for the phone of your choice gets printed uniquely for you. In this case, a nice beach shot that my wife had asked for her iPhone 4S here. Just pick the model, iPhones and Galaxy S3 and S4 only, mind you. Click to upload your photo. Wait a moment and then drag it into the pristine white virtual case back. There are rotation and zoom controls, plus you can drag the image around as needed until it all looks right. Then hit buy and you're off and running. A few days later, it arrives in the post. Here's a live unboxing. And there we are. A beach sunset isn't terribly personal, of course. You'll probably want your partner or child or pet instead. The printing quality and the finish is first class, I have to say. The customized case feels premium. Let's pop it on the iPhone. Yes, you can get generic patterned cases for these popular phones in a similar style on the high street for half the price, but the customization service does produce something rather special. Now, I wonder when ProPorter will get round to adding personalized cases for my Nokias.